right, everybody, welcome to Discussion 5, Visualize Our Potential with Ordained Women. I'm Christy Money, and I would like to introduce our amazing discussants for tonight. First, let's start out with Abby Hansen. Abby, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, if I can. Okay, do I have my mute off?
Yes.
I'm Abby Hansen. I'm a stay-at-home mom of 3 in Lehi, Utah. That's me.
All right, thanks, Abby. Happy to have you. Nancy, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sorry, just unmuting. Yes, I do social media for Ordained Women, and I'm an assistant professor in art history in Southern Utah.
Great, thanks, Nancy. And we have Kate Kelly. Kate, would you like to say a few words before we begin?
Hi, my name's Kate. I'm an attorney, and I'm the founder of Ordained Women.
Great, and we have Natalie Kelly here with us too, with her amazing little baby. Natalie, can you say a few words?
Hi, I'm Natalie Kelly. I blog at Feminist Mormon Housewives as Nat Kelly. This is Hamilton, or the Ham, and I'm a union organizer.
We're happy to have you here. And we have Rolf Strawbar, my husband, Rolf.
Hi, my name's Rolf. Like Christy said, I'm her husband, father of 2, just finished my PhD in education, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks. And we have Chelsea Shields-Dreyer tonight. Chelsea, can you introduce yourself in a few words?
Hi, I'm Chelsea Shields-Dreyer. I'm glad to be here. I'm been participating in Mormon feminism for over a decade, and I am really invested and excited about what we're doing.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. Now, before we begin, Kate, would you like to say anything about what's been going on?
Hey, everybody. If you're watching this live, you know it's been a crazy week in Mormon feminism and the church. On June 22nd, which is coming up, my bishop and Bishop Rick are convening a council to decide whether or not to disfellowship or excommunicate me. But I think, I'm just taking it one day at a time at this point, and I think this discussion shows that Ordained Women will continue the great work that we're doing, and we're going to keep asking important and sincere questions, and that includes me, and that includes everybody on this chat and everybody who's supporting us. So I think this just proves that you can't silence a movement by silencing one person, and I'm not a person who will ever be silenced.
Thank you, Kate. Yep, you are in our prayers.
Thanks.
Of course. Let's get started with discussion 5, Visualize Our Potential. So let me start out reading the intro story on the first page. 3-year-old Evie sat at the table with her full concentration on the sliced Wonder Bread, water, and plate she'd gathered in front of her after church. Her family had attended 2 meetings that day, their home LDS ward and a friend's baby christening conducted by a female pastor. No one noticed as she carefully broke the bread, placed individual pieces on the plate, and poured water into little cups. She caught her mom by surprise as she felt a tug on her dress, turned around, and looked down to see her little girl reverently offering her a plate of bread. "Here, Mama, I made sacrament for you," she beamed. She swooped Evie up into her arms and hugged her tight. She realized today was the first service Evie had seen with a woman officiating, and her daughter was paying attention. So this is what we're going to talk about tonight, about how, in a sense, you can't be what you can't see. And if you turn the page to the review for discussion 4, we talk about how this relates to previous discussions. In that discussion 2, we talked about how women did indeed perform some of these blessings by laying on of hands, but in the early 20th century that was taken away. And then in discussion 4, we talked a little bit about how Spencer W. Kimball had, quote, I'm quoting here in the review, he had wanted urgently to find out firsthand what the Lord thought about the priesthood and the temple plan for black members. It was not enough to just wait until the Lord saw fit to take the initiative. The scriptures admonished him to ask and to knock if he wanted to know for himself. So we know that revelation can only come through from the Lord through the prophet. So we also recognize that personal revelation also plays a role in the process. And so, and revelation doesn't usually come without being invoked or initiated. So it's hard for many of us, I know it was for me, to even imagine what it would be like if women were ordained. So how could we want what we don't even know we could have? So, and even let alone ask for it. So, so I think that this is an important discussion to have, and this is going to be very interactive tonight, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, to start us off, Chelsea, would you be willing to tell us more about the global perspective of what this means?
This is larger than Mormon feminism. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. For me, I see Mormon feminism as a microcosm of a larger problem in the world. So if we look 200, 300 years ago at the way that all world religions treated African Americans and minorities, we see that God said so, right? It was just the enemy with civil rights, with equality of minority and racial discrimination, is eventually people weren't okay with that, because God said so. And we began to see greater opportunity and parity for different types of ethnicities. And I see the same thing with gender. I see that in the next 100 years, the greatest issue around the world that will unite all women is the issue of religious gender equality. And I envision a future where not only Mormons, but Muslim women, Jewish women, Catholic women, well, we all rise up together and we say that that's not enough because God said so. And we say that, we believe that God speaks to women too. And that single act alone, and we've already tried that. Kate and I have attended, most of us have attended Equality Day, where we're working with Muslim women and Jewish women and Catholic women. We've been doing this interfaith effort already, laying the groundwork. And what we see is that one issue alone, while it seems small on a Mormon scale, can change the world. Let's look at it, I'll say two things more. Let's look at it from a Mormon perspective. If all of those missionaries out there today that are women could baptize, how would that change the landscape? If all of those congregations in Latin America, India, Africa, that don't have enough priesthood leaders, if the women could step into those roles, how could that change the face of the Mormon church? And then at a greater global scale, I look at it like women are gaining greater parity in all of our secular lives, from medical to military to political to health. And what we see is that as women are in these decision-making capacities, and it's not only the ability to make decisions, but the ability to have a say in where the money goes, what we begin to see is that money goes toward infrastructure, health, education, and it goes to those types of things that religion at its core should be doing. And so we just see at a greater scale the potential of female ordination could literally change the world. And we want to be on the forefront of that fight.
Thank you, Chelsea. So true. Does anyone else have any comments before we move on?
I think it's important to keep in mind that along with you can't be what you can't see. Like Lori Winder-Stromberg always says, it has to enter the realm of the thinkable before it can enter the realm of the possible. So I think a lot of these conversations we're having, and maybe people out there watching, are uncomfortable with these ideas, or it seems very jarring or shocking. But it's important to keep an open mind and just understand that something can't happen unless you can imagine it happening. And we need to get there as a church. So even if some of the stuff we talk about seems, makes you a little uncomfortable, I think it's just important to keep in mind that we're just imagining a future, we're suggesting possibilities, and a lot of the things that we're talking about now for everyone in this conversation were also very new and disconcerting and uncomfortable at some point along the journey. So it's not like we all always thought, like, there should be a female prophet and 12 apostles. It's a process, and so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about, but we just want to put things out there so that it can enter the realm of the thinkable and someday enter the realm of the possible.
Exactly, Kate. Thank you.
I also really like what Chelsea said about how empowering women changes so many things in the world. And in the gospel context, I think, just this last Sunday in church, I heard a woman testify about how the Book of Mormon changed her family's life and completely turned around the whole fate of her family, because I think the gospel has a lot of power to change people's lives and to change the world. And so when I think about empowering women by ordaining women to the priesthood, I just think, how much more power are we going to have to share the gospel around the world, to administer the gospel, to be able to have wards and branches where there aren't enough men to sustain it. I just think we can bring the gospel so much wider in the world if women are ordained as well.
Very true. Okay. Let's move on to the photo illustration activity. So let me read the disclaimer here first. The following are a series of staged illustration of Mormon women officiating in the priesthood. In compliance with current church policy, no ordinances were actually performed when these illustrations were made. The purpose of these photo illustrations is to facilitate discussion about what it would be like in some future day when women are ordained. So, no actual ordinances were performed. So, everyone, you've had a chance to take a look at these two photos. What do you think? What did it feel like to view these scenes?
I'll just jump in there. I think, I don't know, when I first saw the photo of the blessing with men and women together blessing the baby, I felt like it was very shocking. I felt like it was very jarring because it's a very Mormon-looking photo. It's not, it's not easily distinguishable, like, oh, that's another tradition, oh, that's, some other group, that's us. And so for me at first it was like, oh, this is, it felt very boundary crossing. But the more I've looked at the photo and the more I've seen the photo, I feel like it just is very beautiful and very simple. And it speaks to something that's the essence of womanhood, which is motherhood. And like giving women, that's something we hear a lot from women, is not being able to participate in their baby blessing is like a very jarring life event. And so seeing that photo, I'm just like, now I'm like, what harm would that cause? As it says in The Fiddler on the Roof, would it spoil some vast eternal plan if a woman could hold her baby and participate in the blessing? And the more I see that photo, the more I think, no, it wouldn't.
I completely agree. When I look at that photo, of the photo on the left, I see men and women participating and blessing that child together, and I think that that's an incredibly beautiful thing. When I think often when people think, oh, well, women want the priesthood, they must be power hungry and prideful, and I think that when I look at that photo, it really brings home that the priesthood blesses the lives of others, and that so many of us, we just want to be able to bless our children. We want to be able to bless our friends. We want to be able to bless those around us by exercising the priesthood in the same way that our husbands, our brothers, and our fathers do. And we know what that looks like, and we want to participate in that with others. And so when I look at that photo, I think it looks really wonderful. It would have been wonderful if I had been able to bless my daughters with my husband, if we could have engaged in that together, and that seems like it would have been a really faith-affirming, marriage-affirming action to kind of do those things jointly.
I had a hard time not being able to participate in that ordinance, mainly because I feel like so many times when I have an issue with gender equality in the church, people say, well, you have motherhood. And what I saw after I had my daughter was that motherhood is given a lot of credence with words, but not with actions. So the way I felt sitting there watching this ordinance take place without me present was that even this one thing that supposedly I have in public, it's completely organized, orchestrated, ordained, and participated by in an all-male organization. And that was very painful to me, that even this thing that supposedly I have, I couldn't participate in. And so it felt like motherhood is confirmed with words but not with action. And I've always felt that way with the church, that if we really valued women as mothers, we'd give them the power to bless their babies and heal their babies. And I just felt like it was a really moving moment for me in my life that I've never been able to get back from, which is just this idea that I'm okay with Mormons valuing motherhood, but please show me in one actionable way how you value motherhood.
Thank you.
Can I share something?
Mm-hmm.
Unless somebody else is talking. Sorry. Can I share kind of some thoughts I had on the other picture, which is a girl getting a blessing from a woman? I've had a lot of experiences in my life, especially now. I think of them all the time, where there would be blessings if women had the priesthood and could give blessings, like we used to in the church. But I have also looked back on really powerful experiences in my life and seen how they could have gone differently. My husband is in the military. He's deployed a couple times, and the last time he left for a year in Iraq, I was 15 weeks pregnant. It was my third pregnancy, and he left on a Sunday morning, and Tuesday morning I went in for my 15-week appointment and found out I'd lost the baby. And he was gone. He wasn't coming back for a year. I had a DNC that afternoon. I came home from the hospital, and I had a lot of special, powerful spiritual experiences that week that really healed me. One thing that was really meaningful to me was a couple of my friends came over, female friends came over and spent just a couple hours with me. And both of them were moms. Both of them had had miscarriages. And I think they spent a couple hours there, and we laughed and we cried, and I don't even remember everything we talked about, but it was such a healing experience just to be with those women. And at the end, as it was wrapping up, and they were getting ready to leave, these were both LDS women. They're my neighbors. I live in Utah County. And one of them said, "Would you like a blessing? We could send our husbands over." And I remember, like, doing a little inventory. Like, I was in my pajamas. I was still bleeding and cramping quite a bit. I didn't have any makeup on. I had been crying. Like, this was a very intensely female time in my life. But I just almost said, like, no, I don't want the men to come over and see me like this. But at the same time, I was like, I really want to hear what God has to say to me right now. And my husband is not here to give me that blessing. And so they left, and they traded with their husbands. They sent their husbands back alone because they had to stay with their kids. And I had a beautiful blessing, like, from my neighbor, which meant a lot to me, and honestly was very healing, and is one of the experiences where I think that the priesthood is a real power. And looking back, though, I thought that was really uncomfortable for me. And it was probably uncomfortable and kind of awkward for them, too, because they came over to a woman who was going through, like I said, something very intensely female, and to come in and try to how beautiful and what a blessing it would have been for me to have been able to ask those two friends of mine, after spending that time with me, to put their hands on my head and give me a blessing. I didn't know women used to do that. Now I do. And it's one of those things, I hope that my daughters, when they grow up, that they can have those kind of experiences, that things can change. That's my thoughts on the blessing.
On the topic of blessing, we have a question from a viewer that I want to throw out. Let's see, Kevin Flanagan asks, were women's laying on of hands, washings, and anointings, etc., merely manifestations of gifts of the Spirit or actually representations of priesthood administrations more in the vein of the Melchizedek priesthood? And I just wondered if anyone wanted to tackle that question, because I think that that is a relevant, a good question.
Yeah, that is. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I had a thought, also related to what I see when I view those pictures. A couple people described, I think Kate said, jarring and a little, like, whoa, wait, this is different. And what I actually felt when I saw those pictures was, yeah, that totally looks right. I mean, I'm looking at it now, and the picture of the people blessing their baby, there's a woman in pink at the top of the circle, and you can't even see her face, but the love with which she is holding and looking down upon her baby is just breathtaking. And it just seems really natural. It just feels right to me. It gives me the same feeling that I've had whenever I've received priesthood blessings from men in my life that are really meaningful, and I feel that same spirit and that same sense of peace and rightness. So in terms of the question about the historical precedent of the women who did the washings and anointings and did bless women before pregnancy, whether or not they had the ordination, I believe that the spirit of the priesthood that I have felt through receiving blessings my whole life was absolutely present in those, and that they had just as much efficacy.
I think that that's such a difficult, thank you, Nat. I think that that's such a difficult question because we see the priest as a gendered thing. And I think that the women who are performing the ordinances, or performing these laying on of hands and these washings and anointings, saw these actions as essential and as you say, Nat, as having real efficacy. I think, Rolf, you were going to say something. Did you have anything to add to this?
Well, I was just going to say, at least in the framework that was provided by Elder Oaks in the last conference, which I think was fascinating and very provocative, and Ordained Women's official response to it, I think, was very interesting too. But within that framework, where according to what Elder Oaks taught, basically everything that happens within the church happens under the auspices and keys of the priesthood. They're just delegated, and that in that sense they can also be delegated to women. I think there could easily be an argument made that when blessings happened in the early church, following the line of thought that Elder Oaks was laying out, that was very much under the power and authority of the priesthood.
Yes, thank you, Rolf. That is an interesting observation from Oakes' talk, which definitely gave us a lot of hope for things to come. Does anyone else have any thoughts, feelings, or reactions to the second photo of the woman being ordained by another woman? The photo illustration, I should say. Okay. Well,
I just wanted
to. I was going to say the second photo on the right with the woman being blessed by another woman, I think that face that she's making, everyone needs to keep in mind when they think of ordained women feminists. It's a face of peace. It's a face of spiritual enlightenment. It's a face of... Sorry, it's been a very rough week. It's a face of sincerity, and it's not... I just think that is a perfect visual representation. If you think that what we're asking for is so wild or so radical or so shocking or so jarring, you need to keep that in mind, that what we're asking for is to participate in a spiritual experience, and that we sincerely desire to be, like Abby said and like Chelsea said, to be integrated into these very pivotal experiences in the Mormon spiritual life. And I think that from my experience, and we'll talk more about this in the River of Life, but a lot of the time on my Mormon experience, I'm on the outside. So if there's a blessing, I'm sitting on the outside of the circle. If there's a baptism of someone that I baptized on my mission, I'm sitting in the congregation watching the ordinance be performed. And the thing that I like about these photos is we're in the circle. We're in the blessing. We're not on the outside. We're integrated into the full spiritual life of Mormonism.
So I've got some thoughts too on this particular illustration. I know the woman who's sitting, I know the woman whose hands are on her head, and I know the woman who took the photo. And I know that all of these things were done to illustrate what could be possible within Mormonism. And I know that behind this photo there was a very sincere effort to explore what could be possible in a very hopeful sense. The woman who took this photo had not been to church in a very long time, had had very negative experiences when she had brought an African-American friend to church before the end of the priesthood ban, and really desired to connect with her faith in a new way. And so when I look at this photo, I'm reminded of these people that I know. They've all been my students. And I see something that is tremendously hopeful. And really, when I look, as you said, Kate, when I look at that woman's face, what I see is hope for good things. And I see that this is a faith-affirming, a hopeful action of something that might soon, perhaps, come to pass.
Thank you, Nancy. Me too.
What I see,
Chelsea?
I just have a quick one, is when I first went to the temple, there's many things that were really hard for me in the temple. And especially as an anthropologist, I thought I would love the ritual, and I thought I would be really excited by the symbolism. And I was overwhelmed by the gender issues until I did my initiatories. And there was something about a woman laying their hands on my head that was inspiring and was divine and numinous, and I will never forget that. When I think of the temple, like, those are my positive memories. Not covering my head, not watching a video. It's having a woman's hands on my head and performing that ordinance. And it's a beautiful memory of mine, one that I will always cherish, and one that I wish everyone had the opportunity to experience. It was life-changing.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Chelsea. So along those lines, we will get to the River of Life activity, where we'll talk about more of those personal experiences. So before we do, we're just going to read a few quotes from general authorities. So Rolf, would you be willing to read the first quote by Elder Kaus, starting with "Imagine" for us?
Imagine what it would mean to you if you could see yourself as God sees you. What if you looked at yourself with the same benevolence, love, and confidence that God does? Imagine the impact it would have on your life to understand your eternal potential as God understands it.
Thank you, Rolf. And Kate, would you be willing to read the Spencer W. Kimball quote that is just 2 down?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Let me scroll down. We talk about the gospel in its fullness, yet we realize that a large part is still available to us as we prepare, as we perfect our lives, and as we become more like our God. Are we ready for it?
I love that. Are we ready for it? So, what do these quotes suggest to us about our potential? What do y'all think?
I think I love that quote because it's so, you know, when I hear people arguing against ordained women, or, you know, having really strident opinions about the ordination of women, I feel like their vision is very myopic, and it can only see what is and what has been, and not what can be in the future. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. You know, what these quotes are saying is like, you can't even imagine what God has in store for you. You can't even imagine the fullness of the glory of God. And so for me, it's just important to try to open up that space and really open up our minds to what our potential could be. And according to these leaders who we sustain, our potential is limitless.
Definitely. Thanks, Kate. Does anyone else have any comments about these quotes? Okay. Abby.
I was going to say, I'm excited about how little that we know. And when it comes to our potential and becoming like God, I think there's just so much that we have to learn and that we have to discover. And that just really excites me. I just see the future as totally open. There are no walls. And that's really, really exciting.
I agree. Thanks, Natalie. Abby, do you have the discussion in front of you?
I'm on my phone, so I have to.
No worries. I'm going to ask you one of the questions based on this President Uchtdorf quote. So keep that in mind. Will somebody be willing to read it out loud for us under hope and future blessings? Does someone have that?
Sure.
Thanks, Nancy.
From Elder Uchtdorf, we learn about the principle of hope. Quote, "Hope is not knowledge, but rather the abiding trust that the Lord will fulfill his promise to us. It is confidence that if we live according to God's laws and the words of his prophets now, we will receive desired blessings in the future. It is believing and expecting that our prayers will be answered. It is manifest in confidence, optimism, enthusiasm, and patient perseverance. In the language of the gospel, this hope is sure, unwavering, and active. The prophets of old speak of a firm hope and a lively hope. It is a hope glorifying God through good works. With hope comes joy and happiness. With hope, we can have patience and bear our afflictions."
Thanks, Nancy. Now, Abby, I had thought of you when I put this one in because you're so incredibly infused with hope since I've met you. So I was wondering what you thought about President Uchtdorf's assertion that hope is active, and what, if any, do you think its implications are for faithful agitation?
You know, I'll try to answer your question best I can. As the last week has been really hard, obviously, for a lot of us, and I have felt a lot of darkness and a lot of desire to just give up. To be honest, I think a lot of people understand that feeling. And when I hear those words from Elder Uchtdorf, actually give me hope. Well, obviously it's about hope. When he talked about patient perseverance, and I feel light instead of darkness, and that I think that's what our Heavenly Parents want us to feel. They don't want us to feel that darkness, and they don't want us to give up. I think I forgot your question. I just started crying. Will you tell me the question again?
No,
I'm sorry.
That's perfect. No, I appreciate that. I think we all can relate to that very well. How do you think hope plays into our activities and our desire for faithful agitation? And this can be open to everyone. What do you think about hope being active?
So I know this is a really small thing, but a colleague of mine who's we would consider enormously conservative, TBM, super Mormon, was telling me the other day, just yesterday, he came into my office and said, "Hey, I was going over the budgets yesterday, and I noticed for the first time in my life that the young men's budget is so much larger than the young women's budget. They spent about $300 per young man for a scout camp. and times however many young men, it's thousands of dollars, and we don't spend that on women at all. It's no activity is worth that much. And he said, I've never noticed that before, but because of what's going on right now, because of you, like, it's the first time I became aware of it. And I know that's such a small thing, but after the craziness of this week, after feeling like I've been pounding my head against a wall for 10 years, trying to get these issues, someone to listen and care, and then the second someone listens and cares, we get in trouble. So it's just a discouraging process. That one statement from this guy made it completely worth it. If nothing else changes, this person, who I know will go on to be a bishop, a stake president, who knows what else he'll be with his life, he gets it. He sees it. He may not get it fully. He may not want ordination. But you know what? He sure as heck sees that it's unequal for young men and young women, and he's going to do something about that. And it's such a small thing, but when people say, you know, like, we've failed if we don't gain ordination, I disagree. In this last year, more has accomplished for women gender equity in the Mormon Church than in 10 years previous. And I just have an enormously optimistic and hopeful view, even though it can be hard sometimes, that there's so much change happening, so much consciousness raising that's happening, and sometimes you can't measure that, but it's super important. And the conversations we're having today will replay in people's heads in a decade from now when they're on the decision-making bodies, and it will change the discussion. And of that, I am enormously optimistic and hopeful.
Thanks, Chels. I was just going to chime in and say, so yeah, everyone, these Google Hangouts are going to be watched in perpetuity. But I think it's a question I've been getting a lot recently is, you know, why don't you yield? Why aren't you more submissive? Why don't you, you know, all these different things. And I think it's interesting in light of this Uchtdorf quote, you know, he says we speak of a firm hope and a lively hope, you know, with perseverance and confidence and all of these things. So when it's hope in the gospel, people see this perseverance and unyielding as positive. And for some reason, when ordained women gets involved, it gets mixed up, and that unyieldingness is perceived sometimes in a negative light. But I see it in the same light as we see the other, you know, principles of the gospel. We're unyielding in our hope. We have no doubt that someday women will be ordained, and I see that not as being obstinate, but having a pure hope, having this faith, having a firmness in our convictions that in all other you know, Mormon gospel topics is praised and is valued. And I think that's something that I need to keep in mind going forward, that it's not negative to persevere. It's not negative to weary the Lord unceasingly with your petitions. It's a positive thing, and it demonstrates faith and it demonstrates hope more than it demonstrates the opposite.
Yes.
I can also chime in on this. I think that hope, everything in our faith is active. We believe in active faith, that you need to do good works as well. It's not enough to passively believe. It's not enough to passively hope. It's not enough to passively love. You know, Jesus was very clear that the love he preached about, that was the most important commandment, was not a passive sitting, holding a feeling in your heart. It was active. It was helping the person laid by the way, on the wayside by the road. It was giving away your coat to the person who was oppressing you, turning the other cheek, helping, you know, helping the needy, and being out in the world, active. And that's how our faith is. That's how our hope is. That's what everything about the gospel is. Nothing about the gospel is passive and silent and keeping it to yourself. Just that's everything about Mormonism teaches us that we need to be active, and that when we have feelings, we should act on them. And that's what I love about ordained women, is that it's finally a way to act on these feelings of hope that I've had for a long time, that I feel like I haven't had a way to act on them in other areas of my life.
And I think, Nat, you bring up a really good point about, you know, so many of us feel moved through our faith to engage in this. It is not in spite of our faith or opposite to our faith. It's not out of a spirit of rebellion that we hope for the ordination of women. It's really aligned with our faith, that our hope for this thing springs out of our belief in Jesus Christ and our study of the gospel. And while many people see us as rebellious, this is not where our participation in ordained women comes from. It comes from a very different place. And other people, they don't have that same kind of testimony of the ordination of women that we have. And that's fine, and maybe someday they'll get there. But our hope comes for this thing comes from a place of faith. I can't emphasize that strongly enough.
Yeah, that's so true, Nancy. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your reactions. Okay, let's move on to the River of Life group activity. And I'm going to turn the time over to Natalie to lead us in it.
I feel like I'm in Sunday school. This is all just so Mormon. So I think that people who are participating in these discussions probably represent a range of views. I'm sure there are a lot of people participating in these discussions and watching this who already support women's ordination. There are probably some people who have no idea what this is about and just came on here to see what is this crazy thing even happening. And I think that there are a lot of people who know that their loved ones support women's ordination, know that people that they respect and have served with support women's ordination, and they're seeking to understand where that's coming from. So for those of us who know that we support women's ordination, I think it's very easy to forget why. It's really easy to focus on where we're at now. I think a lot of people, something that I tend to do, when somebody asks me why I support women's ordination, I talk about the value of equality and theories about justice and hierarchy, and I have a lot of stuff that comes from my head and my brain that I'm thinking in theories. But in reality, those things are not what led me to support women's ordination. What led me to support women's ordination were some very specific moments of my life, specific experiences that I've had. And those are really what I want to share with people. If they ask me and they're wondering, why do I support women's ordination? It's not just because I believe in equality. It's not just because I believe it's right. It's because of what I've experienced and the things that I've gone through. And those experiences have really guided me to this point. So I think for anybody listening, whether they believe very strongly in women's ordination or whether they're just trying to understand or whether they're not quite sure how they feel, I think that the way that we can explore for ourselves more where this comes from for us is to delve into our experiences, to delve into our life history. So that's what we're going to do now with our River of Life activity. So the River of Life is just a way to draw and visualize your life history. And the question that I have for the group is, what events, what moments and experiences in your life have led you to the point where you're taking part in this discussion today? And that's the first part of the River of Life that we're going to do. So while people are thinking about their own experiences and their own history, I'm going to go ahead and share my River of Life. I thought about this ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. My baby did grab it while he was sitting at the table with me, so my paper is crinkled, which is not going to improve my very shoddy drawings. I am not an artist. So I'm setting the bar very low for anybody who wants to participate in this. Your art will be better than mine, so go ahead and don't be shy. So I wanted to share, I thought of 5 different events in my history that I could pinpoint were important moments that led me to wanting to support women's ordination. So here we go. This is my first moment in my river. Here's the first half of my river for my life history. The first moment is a picture of a little girl sitting at a house watching her dad walk away with a suitcase. Oh, very sad, I know. My dad left our family when I was a young girl. And with him, he took the priesthood out of our home, and we didn't have a priesthood holder in our home anymore. And my brothers weren't active in the church. They weren't priesthood holders. So when we needed access to the priesthood for blessings at the beginning of the school year, or when we were sick, or hard times, or baptism for my younger siblings, anything, we relied on home teachers, bishops, a lot of uncles and cousins, and we had a lot of terrific people who would come into our life. And it was never my mother, obviously. And I remember one home teacher in particular. His name was Brother Quackenbush. And he was great. He was a very diligent home teacher. He really looked out for our family and really cared about us. And I remember one year before 7th grade, he came over to give me my blessing before the beginning of the school year. And he gave several of us blessings. And after every single one, he would take his hands off of our head and go, woo, woo, woo. And I was like, what's that about? And he just described, and the way he talked about it, I just remembered so vividly that you just can't even imagine what it feels like to feel God's power in you and to feel that inspiration coming through you. There's nothing like it in the world. Every time I feel it, it's like electricity. Every time I give a blessing, it's like an electrical current in my body. And I was an incredibly devout teenager, and I just remember thinking, wow, the priesthood is incredible, and not really allowing myself to be sad that I couldn't experience what he was describing, but just thinking that was a really remarkable thing. The second experience on my river is me. I told you the drawings are very amateur, praying by the side of my bed when I was 13 years old, when I was very sad about my father leaving and sad about my family being in the state that they were in. I read in Matthew where Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I said in a prayer, I'm 13 and this is too hard for me, Jesus, and I need you to take this from me. I need you to carry my burden. I've carried it as far as I can. And that was the moment that wrote Mormonism into my bones, because I did feel the love of Jesus envelop me, and it was an incredible spiritual experience that stayed with me to this day. And that's when I knew that this was my heritage, my home, and my spiritual place of belonging. The third story on my river is in May 2007. I went to the temple and got married in the Salt Lake Temple. And you can see below my temple there is a broken heart, because like Chelsea talked about earlier, the temple was very difficult for me, very devastating, because I could not understand what the temple said about women, and it just didn't match with what I had been taught and experienced my whole life from the church. And that was the experience that first, it was so jarring and so difficult that I was finally able to look at the other experiences in my life and allow myself to ask those questions like, well, why can't I ever experience what Brother Quackenbush described as being so incredible, giving a blessing? And it really took that heartbreak and that devastation for me to be able to honestly look at those experiences in my life. The next experience on my river is me teaching a class of young women. I was the young women's president in a former ward, which was the most incredible calling I can ever imagine. And I felt incredible responsibility for the girls that I taught. I took my stewardship incredibly seriously, and I spent more time thinking about their futures and their well-being than I did about anything else in the world. And I remember specifically one moment where a girl who was a recent convert, we were having a lesson about the priesthood, and she raised her hand and said, Sister Kelly, I forget, who gets to have the priesthood again? And I felt the wind kind of go out of me for a second, and I was like, oh my gosh, people don't usually ask it this directly. And I couldn't think of what to say for a second, and I just said, men. Men get the priesthood. And she said, oh, okay. And it crushed me that she didn't even question her exclusion. And that there could be a young girl who is she was so confident, so ready to take on the whole world, who's learning about this amazing, amazing thing called the priesthood, and finds out she's not eligible and doesn't even question it. It made me realize that there is something wrong with the messages we are sending to our young women. And I also realized that someday she might have the same feelings I was having and the same insecurities about women's place in the church. And someday she might think back and say, well, Sister Kelly really respected herself. Sister Kelly was a strong woman, and she was okay with women being excluded from the priesthood. So I'm going to take my lead from her. And I just realized that that would break my heart for any woman to accept, for any one of these young women that I cared about so much, to accept inequality because they thought that I did too. So the last experience on this part of my river is a computer screen. It's on the webpage Ordained Women, and there's a tab open for FMH, which you probably cannot read. Because I think many of us have spent a lot of time stewing in these thoughts and wondering what to do and just feeling hopeless, and finding a community of women who felt the same way, realizing that there are countless women in the church who feel the same way and would like to see change, filled me with so much hope and helped me realize that there are things that we can do. And I had experienced a lot of heartbreak in the church regarding how women are treated. And the founding of Ordained Women was what helped me transform my heartbreak into hope, and helped me realize that the place that I had felt the most spiritual uplift in my entire life could still be my spiritual home, because there's hope that the things that help make me feel excluded can change. So that is my river of life. And so in reality, I don't support women's ordination because of any nice theory that I learned in a women's study class or anything. It's because of these things that I've experienced, and it's because of what those experiences have taught me. So I would love to hear from a couple of other people who thought ahead of time about the experiences in their life, and people who are listening can draw their own rivers. I encourage you to grab paper and draw your own river, and you can represent it any way you like. It doesn't have to be like my river, and come up with some specific experiences in your life that have led you to this. So I think Christy was going to share her river of life with us as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Actually, if it's okay, I think I might defer to Kate on this one, because she had mentioned that she had done it as well, and I'm very curious to see what hers is. Kate, would you be willing?
Okay, so I didn't draw out my whole experience, but I drew two sort of formative experiences that I was thinking of. So one of them is this drawing. Sorry, I'm worse than Natalie. This is a picture of me when I was 8 years old, and as I was thinking about this, I'm very particular about the way I dress, and that's an expression, a form of expression that I enjoy, and I always have been since the time that I could decide how to put my own clothes on. And when I was baptized, when I was 8 years old, when I got into, I was so excited. I made invitations and sent them to everyone I knew. I was very, very, very excited about my baptism. But when I got there on the day, they only had an adult male jumpsuit. And I was beside myself. I was 8 years old, and I was imagining this beautiful princess gown that's white that I would be wearing, and I was just so upset. And I would, I told my parents, that's it, I'm not getting baptized, like, I can't wear this. And looking back on it, it's funny to me that that's my most like prominent memory from that day. And of course, at the time I was 8 years old, and I was just being a little bit of a diva in some ways. But in other ways, I look back on it and I think, that to me symbolizes my place in Mormonism. Adult males are the characters in every story. Adult males are the ruler by which all other people are measured, and adult males are the model for which clothing is made. If you're thinking about a baptism, it's going to be an adult male, and everyone else is an other. And on that day, when I was 8 years old and I got baptized, I felt very much like an other. I didn't understand why, all Mormons are baptized when they're 8 years old. Why don't they have something to wear for a little girl? And so that experience really stuck out in my mind. The second one is when I was on a mission. That's the Barcelona, Spain flag, and me as a sister missionary. I was very active and outspoken, as I am just in life, and I like to ask a lot of questions, and I was very, very obedient as a missionary. I was obsessively obedient. I would, we had a schedule, a model schedule, and it said we had to leave the house by 8:15, and I would not leave the house 1 minute later. I was very committed, and I loved my mission. But I was also very assertive, and I have certain talents. And on my mission, I remember in one district, there was a branch, and the branch was tiny, and the branch president himself had just gotten back from his mission. So he was maybe like a few years older than us, but not very much older. And he would always he got along with the elders, and he would always joke around. And one day he called me into the office. He was very serious, and I'm very obedient, so I go, and he says, Hermana Kelly, I want you to know that we are calling you to be in the branch presidency. And I was so confused, and then the elders like jump in, and it's like a big practical joke, like everyone is just laughing because I'm so assertive and so bossy that they think it's so funny that I would be a leader. And at the time, it was funny. I did think it was funny, but looking back on that, I'm like, why was it laughable that someone who's very capable and has leadership capacity could fill that role? And so that my mission is really when I saw the very stark contrast between the opportunities that men are given and the delegated duties that women are given. I was able to teach and contact people and prepare them for baptism, but the second they were to be baptized, I couldn't perform that ordinance, and I also wasn't able to perform any leadership capacity. So I saw that there was a real ceiling, and it wasn't a glass ceiling, it was like a brick and mortar ceiling, and there was no way for me to rise to any sort of leadership capacity. So fast forward, went to college, got married in the Salt Lake Temple, and I founded Ordained Women, and now I think about a lot of things. This is a woman speaking from the pulpit in general conference, and speaking with authority, speaking on very heavy doctrinal topics. And I recently in the conference center they changed it so women aren't literally marginalized. They put them in the center now during general conference. And so in my imagination, when I look to the future, I imagine men and women serving side by side. This is the quorum of the 12 apostles, and it's equal men and women in the future, and that's something I also see. I'm trying to open my mind up to these possibilities. I mean, I know everyone thinks I'm just this like radical crazy person, but in a lot of ways, I'm also trying to open up my mind to these possibilities. I'm trying to visualize the future, and so for me, I'm thinking, okay, what would it look like if there were men and women who served as apostles, and that is like a very useful and like powerful exercise for me to do.
And all the men have Mr. T hair, I noticed.
Yes, yes. All the men have Mr. T hair, obviously, in the future.
You still put my drawings to shame. Oh my goodness.
Okay, so hopefully we have more artistically inclined people viewing. So in the interest of time, let's move on to the second part of the river that Kate mentioned, which is viewing where our river of life goes in the future. Because you can't just dwell on where your river has been, but you want to focus also on where it can go. So just for me, I was trying to think, what would the most significant moments be for me if women could be ordained? What would be the things that would mean the most for the experiences? And here's that river. It's a lot bigger and takes up a lot more of the page because that just seems so much more significant to me, the hope. So here's the first thing, which is General Conference. That's Thomas S. Monson. And I don't know the date, but it's sometime this century. And he says, "Thus saith the Lord." And my first moment, I have often thought about what it would be like to hear the announcement that women are going to be ordained. I remember one time I was on a road trip. I was driving from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. for the 2 hours during conference. And I was listening to conference on the radio, and I just felt like, oh, it's going to be this time. There's just, what would it be like if I heard on the radio right now that women were going to be ordained? And I just had to pull over my car on the side of the freeway on my way to D.C. because I was so emotional, just imagining what that would feel like, what it would feel like to hear that announcement. I expect that after ordination of women happens, we are going to see amazing changes in the temple, and that my heart can be bandaged and healed, because I think that women having the authority to make decisions about our sacred rituals and the most important parts of our faith are going to be able to fix things and change things that men can't fix and change because they're not women and they don't know what it's like to be a woman. And then the last moment on my river of the future, this is a really terrible drawing. I'm pretty embarrassed. But this is me ordaining my son to the priesthood in 12 years. I have been so deep in Mormonism my whole life. It is such a huge part of who I am. And my husband has never been that into it. He joined the church while we were dating, and he goes to church with me sometimes, but he's just never been as into it as I am. So I think if my son's ever ordained to the priesthood, I just feel like I know a lot more about the priesthood. I know a lot more about what it means to serve in the church. It means a lot more to me than it does to my husband, and I would want to be the one to have that moment with my son. And I think it would be really incredible. So that is my, when I think about the moments in my past that have brought me here, I think about the moments that made me have a firm testimony of Jesus, that opened my eyes to some of the problems that I didn't see before. And then when I think about the moments in the future, it's the moments that fill me with the most hope, that seem the most beautiful. So I think Abby prepared a river before this conversation started, and I'm wondering if Abby wants to share her future river with the group, if you have it ready.
Oh.
And if you don't, then we can ask somebody else.
How about somebody who's prepared a future river? I don't have one to put.
Has anybody else actually written out their future river? Christy?
Yeah, I have one it's really special to me. One event, I don't know if you can see it. So for my future river, it's my grandchildren's baby blessings. I really wanted to be involved in my daughters. in church because in front of the congregation, in front of the people that we know and love. And so I have a little picture of a little baby. I know my drawings are horrible, but that would just mean so much to me if I could be in that circle someday for my grandchildren. Thank you so much for doing this activity, Natalie.
Thank you for sharing that. So I really hope that the people who are listening and who are going to be doing their own groups can really use this activity as a chance to think about their own life and what would mean the most to them in the future. What all the things that you've done, how would they be different if you had the priesthood in them? So I guess in the interest of time, since we've gone a little bit more than an hour, we can move on to the next thought exercises.
Yes. Let's conclude with the thought exercise on the next page. We're going to move past the sacrament meeting 1 and jump straight to official declaration 3, which is very meaningful to a lot of us. So, Kate, would you be willing to read this for us?
Yeah. Picture a bright spring General Conference morning on April 4th, 2000 blank. Tulips on Temple Square are in full bloom as church members and families enjoy the spirit there as they walk to the conference center and hear the prophet speak. After the opening prayer, President Thomas S. Monson walks to the pulpit beaming with a signature smile and a crowd hushes. Everyone in attendance feels the spirit as he begins to speak. My dear brothers and sisters, how pleased I am to see your smiling faces as we gather together in the great conference center today. On this lively spring morning, like one in which Joseph Smith knelt in the grove with a question, and there appeared to him the Father and the Son, I have a joyous announcement to make. For many years, I have prayed with a humble heart to seek the Lord's will on a very matter of importance to all members of this wonderful church, but especially to his daughters. Prayers were said, years passed, and yet I wearied the Lord with my beseeching on behalf of you, my dear sisters. I know that many of you have likewise been searching, pondering, and praying over many years for an answer concerning the righteous desires of your hearts. But today is my sincere pleasure to announce to the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints worldwide that the Lord has indeed spoken, and it is his desire to reveal that women henceforth are to be ordained to the holy priesthood. It is my testimony as a servant of the Lord that the heavens are truly open and that the Heavenly Father desires to bless all of his children with priesthood ordination. I pray that all of those who are within the reach of my voice and all of those reading these words will receive the witness that this is Christ's true church restored on the earth today, and that he continues to lead and reveal many great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God. Today is a historic day, and I can testify that this revelation will bless the lives of men, women, and families from the ends of the earth for generations to come, henceforth and forever.
Thank you, Kate. So, how did this thought experiment make everyone feel? I'll start. It's the one of the most tender desires of my heart to hear that someday. I pray for it. I'm looking forward to the day, and it gives me. I feel so much like a swelling of hope that this could happen. The heavens are yet open, and it blows my mind. So, thank you for reading that, Kate. Anyone else have any thoughts?
I have really high expectations of our church leaders, and I think I feel like in the last couple of years I've been disappointed often of expecting more. And reading this makes me feel pride, like actual pride in my heart of like, good, like we could be on the forefront of real morality, of giving to the poor, of equality, of love, of making the world a genuinely better place, of being the type of people that religious people ought to be, and we could be on the forefront of that. And so reading this just makes me feel pride and be like, yes, like we're one step closer to being what we could be, you know, instead of feeling disappointed in moral authority. And so, I don't know, it feels good to feel really excited and hopeful and proud of my people.
Thank you, Chelsea. Anyone else?
When I was reading this, I was thinking of a conversation I had with a good friend of mine from high school. I went to high school with him and his wife, and he's now a rector in the Episcopalian Church. And I was talking to him about ordained women, and he was talking about he grew up Episcopalian, and his entire life, women, the ordination to the priesthood has been open to women in the Episcopalian Church. And he specifically talked about how he never would have, that the priesthood, when he thought about being in a situation where the priesthood wasn't available to women, he sat on that for a second and said to me, you know, I don't think I would have been interested in being, I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily stopped being Episcopalian, but I don't think I would have wanted to be a rector. I don't think I would have wanted to enter the priesthood if I had known that that door was shut. That just goes against everything that I think, and just the way that just what my lived reality. And when I think about how that could be the way that, I mean, it's all a matter of perspective. That could be the way that people that are born 10 years from now think within the LDS Church. And that really it's all a matter of imagining possibility. And this, again, my heart swelled the same way when I was reading this. And the possibility that my kids could grow up feeling like my buddy Eric does, that's incredible to me.
Thanks, Ron.
Can I say something? Ralph, a few weeks ago, I went to an Episcopalian church. I hope I'm saying that right. In Provo. I just wanted to visit it. It was a beautiful service. And afterwards, I was visiting with some of the leaders and one of the women who has 2 daughters, and we were talking. And I said, I'm LDS. I just wanted to come and visit your church. I wanted to come somewhere where they ordain women. And that was all I told her. And she said, she was explaining how at least the program at that church works. She said the first Sunday of each month is the Children's Sunday, and all the kids and the youth, they do all the different parts of the service. So they give communion, they light the candles, they do all the ceremonial stuff and the readings. And she said, my daughters love that. Like, it's the kids' favorite Sunday of each month. And she said, I could not fathom belonging to a church where my daughters had to sit in the pew while all the boys went up and they did the communion and they passed everything and they did it because it's such an important part. And she said, my mom was in town, and a couple weeks ago they went to an LDS baptism. I don't know why, if it was a friend or someone, and she said we were explaining to her, because she was also Episcopalian, and they were explaining to her how it works, that the little girl's going to get baptized, the dad will go down there and baptize her, there'll be men as witnesses, the men will gather around and give her a blessing to give her the Holy Ghost, and the men and the men and men, and they're it's very different for both the mother and father involved. And the woman, she said that her mom said, so the moms just sit there, and the aunts and grandpa, like everybody just sits there, and all the men do all of it. And they said, yeah, that's how it works in the LDS church. And she slammed her hand down and said, and the Mormon women put up with that? And at that point I said, well, that is funny, but you should bring that up, because some of us are questioning that. And I just saw how, because of the paradigm I grew up in, it didn't seem weird to me that women weren't involved, that women sat down, that girls sat in the or when the sacrament was passed, the girls just sat silently in the pew. That didn't bother me when I was a beehive, because I'd never seen it any other way. But like Rolf was saying, to someone who grew up with that, and to these people who it's so normal and natural to them, to imagine taking it away just seems so painful and hurtful. And on the other hand, it seems so beautiful and inclusive and wonderful to imagine that we could have that in our church and in my faith. So.
Thank you, Abby.
Yeah, I think also focusing on the kids, when I hear that scenario with President Monson making that declaration, I think, oh, good, I can raise my son in this church because I want to. I want him to have the same heritage I had, but I worry so much about what he would learn about women and men the way things are now. And it makes me so nervous to take him to classes once he gets old enough to understand what's being said. And when I hear that announcement from President Monson, it is like an open door saying it is safe now, you can bring him, and he can have the same experiences with EFY and Mutual and Youth Conference and the Book of Mormon and all of those things that you had. And I really want the church to be a place where I feel safe and secure and confident raising my son.
I agree. You know, I also worry about, I have 2 daughters, and they're very different. And they're just small now. One's almost 6 and the other is 7. And they have 2 very different personalities. And I can see how, if my daughters continue in our church, how the gospel will affect them in each of their personalities. My older daughter is outside of the box. You know, she's a highly sensitive child. She's very independently minded. She's a very analytical thinker. And I worry if there will be a place for her. And with my other daughter, she's very eager to please. And I can see a lot of myself in her. And I can think about, too, how my eagerness to please has hurt me in the gospel. And I worry that she will experience the same kind of hurt. And so on the one hand, I have the child who is eager to please. And on the other hand, I have the independent child. And when I heard, like you said, when I heard Kate read those words and envisioned a priesthood leader reading them in conference, I thought, I can make this work. That the gospel will be a good thing for my children in a church where they're not limited by their gender, at a church that is more inclusive, in a church that offers opportunities for both of my children, for both the independently minded and the more conforming. And I really hope that there will be a place for both of my daughters in the gospel.
Yes, me too, Nancy. Thank you, everyone who's participated so far. Oh, look at that cute baby. We are going to conclude with just noting that there are 3 readings they're interfaith readings, and they're not to advertise to join these other churches, because as you'll remember in the Getting Started packet, the purpose of the discussions is to reaffirm our faith in God and Jesus Christ and continuing revelation, and to foster and encourage continued membership in the church. At the same time, at least in my program, my doctoral program at BYU, we talked about the importance of learning about interfaith experiences to broaden our perspective. So these are in the end of the discussion for people to read later. So I just want to again thank all of you for participating. This was such a great experience, and I wish I could talk with you guys for another hour, really. But I hope that everyone listening will participate in their discussions locally, and we'll end now unless anyone has any concluding things to say. Anyone?
I just wanted to tell everyone thanks so much for participating, and again, I think we opened up by saying that this is what we're going to continue to do. We're going to continue, Ordained Women will continue to have these conversations and to open this dialogue, and I really appreciate everyone who is joining in these conversations despite difficult times.
And also, if you enjoyed this and got something out of this, start your own discussion group and get some women who are in your area and have this discussion again with more people and lead it, please.
Yes. And as we were told recently by a church spokeswoman, those are encouraged, so it's a good thing. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.